June 30, 2024. It was a Sunday, and in France, it was round one of its two-round parliamentary elections. Exit polls favoured Marine Le Pen's far-right National Rally or RN party. They showed it in pole position with nearly 34% of the vote and ahead of its leftist and centrist rivals, including President Macron's centrist Together alliance. Macron's bloc was shown trailing at number 3 with just 20.5% to 23% vote. At number 2 was the New Popular Front, a hastily assembled left-wing coalition that was projected to win around 29% of the vote. So what is happening in France? Why did Macron call a snap legislative poll? What could this poll mean for Marine Le Pen and her party? What happens to the France-EU equation? And why are so many countries in Europe turning right? Hello and welcome to Connecting the Dots. I'm Macharya. Let's connect the dots of the political churn in France and beyond in Europe. Weeks ago, Macron surprised us all by calling a snap legislative poll.
I have decided to give back to you the choice for the future of our parliament with a vote, and so I am dissolving tonight our National Assembly.
His Renaissance party had just faced defeat in the European Union polls at the hands of Marine Le Pen's far-right party, National Rally or RN.
The French have spoken, and this historic election shows that when the people vote, the people win. By giving more than 32% to the National Rally list, the French have just given us the highest score, all parties combined, in 40 years. It is a real emotion to see this beautiful popular force rising up throughout the country.
C'est une vraie émotion.
So why did Macron call a snap parliamentary poll? Because one, he hoped that the French people will hesitate to vote for extreme parties. And two, he believed a stint in the government will show the extreme parties for what they are. In recent years, Macron has been trying to present himself as the only alternative to stop the far right and Le Pen. As far as the far right is concerned, the snap poll was a shot at real political power after years on the sidelines. So what could the snap poll lead to? Simply put, this election decides the next head of government, the Prime Minister. And it could mean the far right forming the new government with Jordan Bardella becoming the Prime Minister. Marine Le Pen has designated him for that role. So who is Bardella? Well, Bardella is the president of National Rally. He is all of 28. He opposes sending French troops to Ukraine. Remember, Macron has not ruled out that possibility. Bardella is also against French deliveries of long-range missiles and other weaponry capable of striking targets within Russia. RN is anti-immigrant and Eurosceptic, even as Macron is pro-EU. Another challenge to Macron is posed by parties of the left that have cobbled together a new popular front. This front fought the snap poll on promises like retirement at 60 years, increasing minimum wages, raising public sector wages, cutting income tax, and introducing a wealth tax for the rich. Never mind that all of this will be calamitous for France, which already has a public debt to GDP ratio of 110%. To put that into perspective, here's what a World Bank study says. A debt to GDP ratio of more than 77% for an extended period of time is a cause for concern. So what could happen in French polity now? While Macron will continue as president for another 4 years because the next presidential election is due only on 11th April 2027, he may be forced to cohabit with a prime minister from a different party. Even if the RN wins a majority in these parliamentary polls despite last-minute maneuvering by its political rivals to block it from coming to power, Macron will still direct defense and foreign policy, but would lose the power to set the domestic agenda, from economic policy to security. So in other words, his authority would be restricted. In the French political system, the Prime Minister leads the National Assembly of France's Parliament. The President is the head of state. President Macron won't be eligible to run again as he is limited to 2 terms. So this is his last presidential term. So what does this election mean for Marine Le Pen? Well, she hopes to win the French presidential polls in 2027. Victory for a party in the parliamentary elections could give a significant boost to her presidential ambitions. She made a bid for the presidency in 2017 and then again in 2022. Both the times, she made it through to the second round but lost to Macron in the runoffs. Now, you might ask, what's fueling Marine Le Pen's party's rise? RN, or National Rally, was known as National Front until 2018. Founded by her father, Jean-Marie Le Pen, it was a political pariah for decades. But Marine Le Pen, who joined the party in 1986 and helmed it for 10 years from 2011, began de-demonizing it in 2017. This party was known for racism and anti-Semitism, but Marine Le Pen tried to tone down that past. She tried to make her party more palatable to traditional conservative and working-class voters in a bid to take its appeal beyond its traditional base. Today, she no longer says that France must get out of the EU. She also hopes to work with other like-minded leaders like Giorgia Meloni of Italy. But she is opposed to globalization and multiculturalism and is expected to be tough on immigration and favor economic nationalism. And what's made President Macron unpopular in France? Well, French voters are frustrated about inflation and other economic concerns. They are angry with Macron's leadership. Some even see him as arrogant and out of touch with their lives. Macron's main reforms, like the ones that raised pensionable age, have been extremely unpopular. Remember also the mass protest of the Yellow Vests in 2018, which erupted because of Macron's green tax on fuel. It was therefore not surprising that Macron lost his legislative majority in Parliament in June 2022. Since then, he has struggled to get anything done in the fractious French Parliament. Le Pen's anti-immigration party tapped that discontent through online platforms like TikTok. Now, given the PM Modi-President Macron camaraderie, if Marine Le Pen were to become the French president in 2027, what could it mean for India-France ties?
I did get in touch with advisors of Marine Le Pen because in 2017, she was still a candidate for the presidency. And they gave a clear message to me that if their party were to come to power, and if Marine Le Pen were to become president of France, that India will be a priority and they will do everything in their power to take these relations to the next level. So I myself have absolutely no doubt that Marine Le Pen will get along with our Prime Minister, just as Giorgia Meloni of Italy gets along well with Prime Minister Modi.
And what could having a president and prime minister from different parties mean for the France-EU equation?
I think if there is a cohabitation between a president who belongs to one political dispensation and a prime minister who belongs to another political dispensation, it will weaken the role of the French president, foreign policy, and France's role in the EU. We will be looking at a weakening of the Franco-German alliance, and we will be not having France really launch initiatives in foreign and security policy. So there are profound implications for France and EU if there is a cohabitation government.
Europe is leaning right, and France is the latest entrant in that trend. Italy, Finland, Slovakia, Hungary, Croatia, and the Czech Republic have hard right parties in government. Right-wing parties are in dominant position in the Netherlands, Switzerland, Sweden and Serbia. In the recent EU elections, centre-right and far-right parties have done well in France and Germany. The reasons are clear. Migration from Western colonies and war-torn parts of the world have become a full-blown crisis in Europe as incidents of crimes increase, resources get strained and jobs are lost to immigrants. Add to that the high cost of living and unaffordable housing. Also increasingly, Europeans are not in favour of bearing the cost of policies that reduce carbon dioxide emissions. All these factors have contributed to the rise of right-wing and far-right parties in Europe. Europe has never been as closed as this before. Its people have made themselves loud and clear in election after election. Issues of migration and economic mess are real. Political leaders vying for power must be ready to address them or be consigned to the new political fringe. Violent protests and attacks on Kenyan parliament after it passed the infamous Finance Bill 2024 in June. The bill had sought to raise an additional $2.7 billion in taxes. The protests forced President William Ruto to do a U-turn on the bill. Dozens have died in clashes between police and protesters who set the parliament ablaze. So why were there protests over the finance bill? Well, the bill had sought to raise taxes on essential commodities such as bread and cooking fuel. This bill was Kenyan government's attempt to help the country deal with a rising spiral of debt. Kenya was in talks with the IMF for a loan assistance, but in lieu of it, IMF asked Kenya to cut its deficit and increase taxes. And hence, the bill was moved. With the bill now abandoned, the future flow of IMF funds to Kenya is in doubt. Kenyans were angry because they are fed up with the burden of rising living costs.
Reject finance bill! Reject finance bill!
So what is the extent of Kenya's debt? Its total domestic and external debt last year was a staggering $80 billion. That's 68% of its GDP and well above the World Bank and IMF recommended maximum of 55%. Kenya's external lenders are the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund or the IMF, African Development Bank and nations that lend bilaterally like China. Kenya wants to avoid a default on its debt repayments because with default, loan credibility takes a hit, making future emergency loans a problem. Not just that, default triggers a chain of economic challenges. In Africa, Zambia and Ghana had defaulted on their debt repayments. So Kenya's big worry is its external debt. It has borrowed heavily to finance its infrastructure projects. But growth tanked and expenses rocketed during the COVID-19 pandemic years. The Ukraine war led to a spike in global food and energy prices. This in turn hit Kenya's ability to repay its debt. Now what made matters worse for Kenya was the tanking of Kenyan currency shilling against the US dollar over the last few years. This swelled up the volume of Kenya's outstanding debt from 42% to 69% of its GDP between 2013 and 2020. Without it having borrowed a lot. Like we said earlier, Kenya has borrowed from China too. No surprise there, because there is usually one suspicious party when it comes to debt, particularly in Africa, and that is China. China is Kenya's largest bilateral lender. Its loans account for 64% of Kenya's external bilateral debt. At the end of 2022, Kenya owed China at least $6.7 billion. And China is not known to be very flexible with its repayment schedule. So on expected lines, it has not offered any debt relief to Kenya. Now, Kenya wants financial support from the IMF and the World Bank to repay China. Past experience shows that defaults could potentially lead to asset seizures by China. No wonder then, President Ruto is desperate for more tax revenues to repay China and its other creditors. So what happens now? Ruto says austerity measures would be required and there would be less funding for teachers and development programs. Now, what is India's stance on the debt distress in the global south? As the previous G20 chair, India has been calling for dealing with debt vulnerabilities effectively and with transparency. In fact, during the visit of Kenyan President William Ruto, India extended a line of credit worth $250 million for its agricultural modernization.
दो कृषि प्रधान अर्थव्यवस्थाओं के रूप में हमने अपने अनुभव साझा करने पर सहमति जताई। कीनिया के कृषि क्षेत्र का आधुनिकीकरण करने के लिए हमने $250 मिलियन की लाइन ऑफ क्रेडिट प्रदान करने का भी निर्णय लिया है।
So in the final analysis, Kenya must find ways to service its debt without punishing its people. The debt crisis is not confined to Kenya. It underscores the challenges faced by many African nations in balancing development goals with financial stability. A collaborative approach involving fair taxation, debt restructuring, and seeing Chinese credit for what it is could be the answer to debt woes of Kenya, the African continent, and the global south. Every one of us is familiar with the Monday blues. For children, it is the day they dust off the lethargy of the past weekend and head to school. But for working adults, this is a day of transition from the weekend relaxation to the usual grind of offices and cubicles. But what if you're suddenly informed that your peaceful escapade of 2 days is over with a new work week of 6 days? That's what has happened in Greece. The Hellenic Republic, which is part of the European Union, has introduced new labour regulations from the 1st of July. These have officially incorporated a 6-day work week model for Greece. This means a normal legal work week of 48 hours instead of the previous 40. Employees can choose to work more if companies want them to. So those who work more will also be paid more. So which sectors are affected by the new model? Select industrial and manufacturing facilities and businesses that provide round-the-clock services. But tourism and food service industries are excluded. So what's the rationale behind this decision? Well, Greece has been battling a severe economic crisis and crippling debts that have worsened since 2009. The debt crisis of 2009 had nearly put the country out of the Eurozone. But Greece avoided the worst-case scenario by accepting a series of bailouts worth billions of euros from EU creditors. This in turn introduced strict austerity measures to reduce government spending and shrink the budget deficit. So simply put, it looks plausible that Greece wants its people to work for more number of hours to give more strength to its economy. But the question is, can it solve Greece's broader economic problems, or is it only a short-term fix? The Greek economy, by the way, is doing better now than during its debt crisis days. But challenges still remain. For instance, low productivity rates. In 2022, the country's GDP per hour was just $34.5, much behind the $53.8 average of the member states of the OECD, or Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, an intergovernmental body of 38 countries that aims to stimulate economic progress and world trade. In fact, among the EU members of the OECD, Greece ranks the last in productivity levels. That's not all. In the last 10 years, many young and well-educated Greeks have left the country because they saw better opportunities abroad. So these regulations can also help deal with labour shortage, at least in the short term. The Greek government says the new rules will simplify administration, reduce probation periods to 6 months, and shine a light on overtime. But the opposition, trade unions, and public sector workers, such as teachers, transportation workers, and more, have been protesting. So let's take a deep dive and weigh the pros and cons of the move. As per Eurostat, workers in Greece already put in one of the highest amount of work hours per week among the Western countries. They clock 39.8 hours every week. Work hours have more or less been edging towards the 6-day model, with many people already working more than 5 days. While the government says longer work hours means higher pay, the flip side is Greece has high inflation and its annual wages are among the lowest in EU countries. The question still is, can higher pay neutralize that? To the surprise of many, Greece is bucking the global trend being seen in countries such as Germany and Belgium of experimenting with fewer work hours or days. As far as the impact of the new regulations on the Greek economy is concerned, many experts think a positive outcome may not be a certainty. And over time, the Greek government may have to think of more structural changes to strengthen its economy. Incentives such as viable career paths, equal opportunity and higher pay that reflect people's professional expertise could also help in the long run. So a day taken away from the weekend could just be a short-term fix to Greece's economic woes. A harder look at the existing challenges and corrective action could be the best course of action. Well, that's all in this edition of Connecting the Dots. This is Munmun Bhattacharya signing off. We'll see you next week with more raging issues. Goodbye for now from all of us in the Delhi newsroom. Take care and stay safe.